Hello Internet, and welcome to the third year of Romney's Reviews. I mean, wow, I'm actually still doing this. I haven't gone completely insane yet. Now, if you're wondering why I haven't done a top 5, bottom 5 of 2014, well, it's because it was a bit of a weak year. I saw more bad movies than I did see good, and although there were some really good ones, I just didn't really see much point and really didn't have enough to really cobble together into any top 5 lists that would sound all that convincing. That was also the topic that we were discussing on Geek News Reviews and Opinions, so if you want to wait for that episode by going over to this channel, then that's where you'll find it. But 2015 seems to be off to somewhat of a decent start, but not without a few stumbles here and there. That said, let's begin this episode of Romney's Reviews. Now, I was excited going into this film because of the director, Matthew Vaughn. I mean, I liked First Class, I liked Kick-Ass, and it looked like a very cool, very, exciting action film that wasn't trying to be bigger than it was. That and seeing Colin Firth acting like a badass was a definite plus. I was also intrigued because it's actually been a while since we've had a fun spy movie, something that's kind of like the earlier James Bond films. All the other franchises, even the Bond franchise included, are kind of trying to go for this dark, grim, and gritty realism, and a lot of film studios have been kind of forgetting that you can have fun with movies. I mean, the Marvel Studios formula has kind of been the last bastion of that, and that's a bad thing. We don't want Marvel Studios to be the only film showing that they can have fun, and so I was also intrigued because this film looked fun. That said, I get the feeling that there was a little bit of conflict regarding whether they wanted to play this completely straight or go down the satirical route, leading to a bit of an awkward mishmash of somewhat dated humor, constantly pointing out and lampshading various spy film cliches, while also trying to sell some fairly engaging drama. It just didn't mesh together very well, and again, some of the jokes were incredibly dated, like something that you would see in a movie from the 90s, not necessarily from a movie today. Speaking of the 90s, this film is very similar to the Pierce Brosnan and James Bond films, where they have the classic cool swab spies, and they just have that general feeling of goofiness that you're willing to overlook because of how much fun you're having. But it also seems like they brought over some of the effects from the 90s as well, because the visual effects in this film needed that extra bit of polish to make it more convincing, but then it also got to a point where they then decided, okay, well, instead of trying to be realistic, let's just go stylized. And as such, there wasn't really that sense of consistency with some of the visual effects. And to be honest, it felt like they either ran out of time or ran out of money, because the way the effects look, you could tell they're in front of a green screen, you could tell which stuff was CGI. It just felt like they probably had enough effects ready for the trailer, but didn't have enough time to actually finish it, kind of like what happened with Hydraulics when they were doing their work on X-Men Origins Wolverine. On top of that, some of the action sequences in this film, while looking fairly cool, they did this annoying thing where they were trying to do these single take action scenes, and they sped up the footage. It looked very stroby, it looked very jittery. You can tell that they didn't really plan the sequence around it being sped up the way they did, and it just didn't look good. I mean, yeah, there was some cool stuff happening in those action scenes, but a lot of it was moving around really too quickly for it to really have any impact, and it was a real shame because it looked like they actually had gone through the trouble of choreographing these large epic fight scenes only to have the strobe and flutter basically mask a lot of it. On a related note, this film is about as over the top as it gets, to the point where you're literally just laughing out loud in the middle of the theater. I mean, it was kind of like a case of, okay, we're going to try to play it somewhat seriously, but then by the time you get to the third act, you're just like, you know what, screw that, let's just go full camp, we don't even care, even to the point that the final epic battle against the film's main villainess is just so over the top and silly, you just can't help but laugh at what you're watching. It's hard not to spoil it, but there is one scene that, once you view this one scene in the film, you can tell that they stopped trying to take this super seriously, and thankfully they don't actually try to bring it back down, because I think even the people making the film know that after this one scene, there is no going back to any semblance of realism, and they just keep getting over the top higher and higher after this one big major over the top stylized scene. It's really hard not to spoil, But although, yeah, it was over the top, they didn't try to basically kind of do it ironically or acknowledge like any sense of shame about it. They just realized, yeah, there's no way to cover, so we're not going to try to recover. Overall, this film is entertaining, but not one necessarily worth paying full price to see. I mean, the sped-up action sequences, the dated humor, and the inconsistencies in the approach the film was taking, whether it was trying to play it straight or try to be full satire, did keep pulling me out of the experience. I know it's based on a comic book by Mark Millar and Dave Gibbons, and a lot of the sillier stuff was probably just more being faithful to the source material, but it lacked that extra polish it needed to be more palatable. I mean, you could tell they were trying to marry the two, like the serious aspects and the silly aspects, but it was kind of a case of they were getting close, but just didn't quite make that last little bit to make the whole thing work. It basically missed it by that much. But if you enjoyed the sillier James Bond movies, whether it was the ones with Pierce Brosnan or even the ones that would have villains like Oddjob or Jaws. I don't know my James Bond, so I'm just kind of throwing that out there. If you enjoyed the silly spy movies, the silly James Bond movies, then you'll enjoy this film because it's in a very similar vein. My recommendation is to see it at an afternoon matinee or seeing it at the Dollar Theater because it's entertaining, just not worth full price. All of that said, Kingsman: The Secret Service gets a 3.5 out of 5. So that's it for this episode of Romney's Reviews. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.